From the Calypsonian to the politician, everyone is talking about the rise in crime and violence in the Caribbean. Are we panicking, or is there really a problem of crime and violence? That's our show today on Carib Nation Crosstalk. Carib Nation Crosstalk will be up next.
When America wants to know what's happening in the Caribbean diaspora, there is one clear choice.
Hello, welcome to Carib Nation.
Both people inside and outside are
very excited about today's program.
Looking at you, I can tell that you have traveled the journey.
One television organization brings America close to the people, stories, and events that affects Caribbean life. Get close, get answers, get Carib Nation.
Welcome to Carib Nation Crosstalk. I'm David Hines. Today we're going to talk about crime and violence in the Caribbean. Well, you may be saying that we've talked about this before. Of course, this is an ongoing problem in the Caribbean region. It has implications for the economy. It has implications for the society in general. With me today to talk about this issue is a grand panel, starting from the person to my immediate right, Professor Diane Forbes Bethaud. I got it right? Diane Forbes Bethaud. Diane is a professor of communication and psychology at Trinity College here in Washington, D.C. Professor Randy Posad, the one and only Randy Posad, who is professor of political science at American University, also here in Washington, D.C. Dr. Claire Nelson, no stranger to Carib Nation. She's been on our show many times. Dr. Nelson is the president of the Institute of Caribbean Studies, a long-standing institute dealing with Caribbean matters here in the Washington, D.C. area. And Dr. Franklin Knight, who is a professor of history at Johns Hopkins University. And you're into public education now. You're doing a column in the Jamaica Observer and also in the Trinidad Express. Welcome all to Carib Nation Crosstalk. Are we panicking? I'll start with you.
Well,
Diane.
I think we are, and I think one of the things I can point to is the ways in which people are speaking to returning residents in Jamaica. We are actually being discouraged from going back. My own parents and others are saying the same thing. But one thing I would say is let us control the panic, because it's about 80% of the crime that's affiliated with gangs. And so if we can try to discuss that, see how we can stem the gang violence, we'll be able to, I think, alleviate some of the anxiety socially that we experience and deal with these issues.
Professor Knight, put this in historical context for us as you answer the question whether we're panicking or not.
Well, if we're not panicking, we ought to panic, because it's a very serious matter. And I think it's serious not because crime is not rising worldwide, but the proportion of the increase in Jamaica is definitely out of proportion elsewhere. And by some estimates, it's the most crimogenic country in the world. It has a higher homicide rate than places undergoing enormous rates like Colombia and Venezuela or South Africa. Now, it depends how you count the statistics, but that's still Jamaica with 2,800,000 people should not be in the same league as countries with 30 and 40 million people.
Dr. Nelson?
Well, I think I would share the sense of alarm that Dr. Franklin Knight talks about, because we are a small society. 2.8 million people are not a lot of people. And so even though, yes, it might be very gang related, it's having an impact on the way business is done. It's certainly having an impact, as I say, in terms of people wanting to reinvest in the island. And if we don't reinvest in the island because of crime, or people, new investment doesn't come, it means, again, a vicious cycle is going to escalate and spiral upwards. So I think we ought to face this squarely and stop hiding it under the covers and look at what can be done to stem or lower the rates of homicide, especially in the islands, not just Jamaica, but across the whole region.
Dr. Prasad, you're more familiar with Guyana and Trinidad and that southern part of the Caribbean. Are we panicking when we look at what's happening there?
As Dr. Knight said, we are panicked at sometimes, so far as I'm concerned. And there are other times when panicking actually is not really productive. And it takes careful assessment of what is on the ground, what's causing it, and how you're going to address it. Because, panic comes out of fear, and that fear is well-grounded and it's legitimate and so on. But leaders have to get a hold of what the situation is. There are different categories of crime that's going on in the Caribbean. There's organized crime, right, which the Jamaican senator just said. There's a new pattern of organized crime in Jamaica. There's petty crime every day kind of pickpocket and choke and rob, this, that, and the other. But it's important because it affects who goes where when to do commerce, this, that, and the other. And then there's a organized political crime, which could take the form of what I would call a violent insurgency in Guyana, or other folks in Guyana call a criminal insurgency. So these are different categories of crime, and they call for different kinds of policies to address them.
Professor Forbes, I come back to you because it seems 1 to 3. They all say that we should be panicking. You say we shouldn't. You want to respond to?
Well, I feel more closely on what Dr. Prasad is saying, because I don't think socially and psychologically that the excess anxiety is productive. I think by following through, giving the Prime Minister some time to work with this anti-crime resolution or plan that he has laid out, give him some time to work with that, for us to also think about complementarity between control and preventive measures, not just we're at this stage we're trying to shoot people left and right, hold them in cells for how many hours and how many days, but really think about both. Can we, on the front end, through education, through civic programs and civic education, through those programs, think about the ways in which we can do both on the front end and on the back end?
Well, I just have to say that I have some concerns about this idea that because we are panicking, we're not also thinking strategically. Certainly many of the countries have looked at citizen security loans and programs. Some have been funded by the international agencies. We have a lot of money put into it. But what I think is making people panic is what we call the senseless violence, the kind of organized crime. When business can't operate in certain parts of whether it's Georgetown or Kingston without a payola or whatever you want to call it, it means that you're talking about people's livelihood. When people in the ghetto are told that they have to get up and march and burn tires or else, that's a problem. And the sense that education alone is going to work, I think it will take much more than that, in the sense that it cannot be education as normally thought of. It has to be education in terms of the police themselves that have to be trained, but also citizens have to become fed up enough. And I'm not sure that the citizens are fed up enough to take a stand. And that's where I have my sense of doubt, based on what my work in Trenchtown, for example, has shown me.
Dr. Knight, are we seeing a new trend in violence, or yes. Can we trace this back further?
Oh, no. I think it's a new trend. This is definitely a new trend in violence. It's not peculiar to the Caribbean. It's worldwide. I mean, if you go to Australia, which is one of the countries that has always been a laid-back sort of country, they're also preoccupied with the rising crime. And there are many reasons for this. The international narco-trafficking is a big context for this worldwide. But there are other things. There are lots of displaced people in urban settings everywhere. My problem with the Caribbean is that the communities, the societies, the islands are too small in population to have the proportion of crimes that are committed there. Jamaica has 800,000 households, more or less. Grenada has 27,000 households, more or less. These are not societies that are large enough to be generating the type of crime figures, not just at the homicide rate, but the petty crime as well.
So what's going on? What's causing this disproportionate number of crimes?
Well, there is a subversion of the systems of law and order and justice. I think the law doesn't really work very well in societies where you have high crime rates. And that's true. It means that the police are not as well trained. The army are not as efficient as they should be. I find it incredible that in Jamaica, the government could not disarm the population in 3 months. We're talking about 4,400 square miles of physical territory. We're talking about 800,000 households. You're talking about an area that at its widest is 50 miles. And we have all sorts of things. You know, we can detect firearms from a satellite passing overhead. You can read a license plate from a satellite. You can also detect firearms. So yes, I think if you remove the firearms, and you must have punitive measures for that, and that it's applied equally, and that's important, you can begin to reduce the crime rate at the homicide level, and it will filter down to the other levels.
Go ahead.
Yes, some of these things are indeed transnational. Take, for instance, the amount of arms, small arms and light weapons that are floating around in the Caribbean. Where is it coming from? Brazil is a major exporter of small arms. A lot of the small arms come from the United States. The Chinese export their AK-47s. How are they getting into the Caribbean? What kind of collective measures are being taken through CARICOM to actually fight gun smuggling? And the gun smuggling, of course, is tied to the narco economy. And so wherever you have this kind of organized crime, you can recruit usually poor people, and you have bands of people who will go out and kill for gain. And now if you combine that with the energy crisis that we're in, and we're in the United States and we have an energy crisis. So you can think about the countries in the Caribbean that are not as well off. We have a food crisis, a global food crisis in terms of prices. All of those things are exerting enormous pressure on the daily lives of people. And you combine that with the organized crime infrastructure that is there, it is little wonder that you're actually seeing what you're seeing.
Multiple causes of crime and violence in the Caribbean. We're talking today about that problem. Don't go anywhere. Carbonation Crosstalk. We'll be right back.
To all those who give birth to, homes to, or just give thought to people adopted as infants, thanks for considering adoption.
When America wants to know what's happening in the Caribbean diaspora, there is one clear choice.
Hello, welcome to Carib Nation.
Both people inside and outside are very excited about today's program.
Looking at you, I can tell that you have traveled the journey.
One television organization brings America close to the people, stories, and events that affects Caribbean life. Get close, get answers, get Carib Nation.
Welcome back to Carib Nation Crosstalk. I'm David Hines. We're talking about crime and violence in the Caribbean. And in the first segment, we talked about what the problem is, generally what it looks like. Let's talk a little bit about how we can go about dealing with the problem. Let me start with you, Dr. Forbes. I mean, you're in communication. From your angle, from where you are, how do you think that this problem can be tackled?
Well, I think one of the things is to deal with a message that we're sending to the youth. Something I had thought about before the program was really the impact of globalization and the influence, I would say, of the developed world on developing countries in the Caribbean. Many of the young people today want what we never grew up with in quote unquote the third world. And so what they see in America through the media, they want in by quick means, and they want to be able to have it and show it off. And I think somewhere in there, the media has an impact, and if we can try to get to the youth in the schools. Some time ago, we had the PALS program, Peace and Love in Schools. I don't know what kinds of social programs are really in the schools right now to deal with that, but to say to them, there needs to be a shift in values, there needs to be a shift in how we envision our lives, and for the young people to not accept as they are, as in because you're poor, you're going to be a criminal, but to make the kinds of choices that when they become business people, they can also resist the extortionists and those kinds of things. I don't know how to deal with the fear component because people are walking the streets day by day, feeling what they're feeling, but I'm thinking if we can get to the youth as young as pre-K, you know, I would call elementary school or primary school in the Caribbean, if we can get to that level and deal with the young minds, and perhaps even the parents, I think that's a start.
Randy, governments have been fighting crime or trying to fight crime from the time before independence to now, and they have been doing a lousy job. So talk about the role of government, if there is still a role for government in helping to fight crime and violence.
Indeed. There are some things that have changed, and it's important to recognize them. Immediately after independence, there weren't many people who were deported from the United States and from Canada and from the UK being sent back to the Caribbean. But today, if you look at the list, it's a very long list of people who are of Caribbean background who came to this part of the world, some of them at a very early age, and for all practical purposes, they're Americans and they're Canadians and they're British and what have you, and they commit a crime, and what happens to them? They're sent back home. In other words, those societies have to pick up the responsibility for something that went wrong here.
Professor Knight raised the point about the inefficiency, I think that's what he was hinting at, of government in terms of fighting crime, and he gave us that scenario of a small country, small land space such as Jamaica, and the government. What is the government doing wrong, or what could they do better?
Well, government, they could pass better legislation. They could, I strongly believe, that one of the difficulties of dealing with the matter is how do you negotiate the demands from your population and at the same time maintaining the constitutional rights that you're supposed to uphold, right? It's a very thin line. How do you go and tackle criminals without search warrants? You might very well know that they're there, but you have to go through a procedure, a juridical procedure to get search warrants and so on and so forth. You have to have grounds to hold people, right? And those kinds of legal reforms might be needed, and stronger institutions, maybe special courts.
But don't they run the risk of infringing on traditional civil liberties and civil rights of people? How would you respond to that?
Well, that is the great difficulty of dealing with this. And if you look at it right here in Washington, D.C., where we are right now, Washington, D.C., with a population of 520,000 people, actually has more homicide than Guyana does, right? Something like 250, same thing with Baltimore. And I know they try very hard in Washington, D.C., and in Baltimore, and Philadelphia is much bigger, but the same kind of constitutional issues actually, it mitigates how effectively you can fight.
Come in on this, because you do work from a civil society standpoint.
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, because, I mean, again, some of the conversations I've had when I visited Jamaica and spent time in the quote-unquote one of the difficult areas of Trenchtown, where people are entrenched. Number one, yes, is an issue of civil liberties, etc. But what liberty do you have when, for example, there's a school, somebody's volunteering to go and teach at the school, and she's held up by gunpoint and said, beg you a bill to buy a bullet. Then she never comes back to the school. So I've asked the community, are you indeed free when indeed you are held in bondage by the people who are running your communities? So at some point, this issue of the responsibility of the community themselves to not continue to say the police are oppressed we, the government oppress you. You are contributing to your own oppression by protecting the so-called dons, for example, or whatever they're called in Trinidad and Guyana. It's the same phenomenon that are in fact oppressing you. It's wanting to be poor, but it's not to be poor and miserable because you can't even walk the streets at night. So I think, I'm sorry, maybe I'm going to be like Mousy tongue on this. I don't think we have the luxury of civil liberties when, as a great policeman in Jamaica, I heard said, who many people don't like, said, why should 10 people terrorize 10,000? And since we know who those 10 are, how much civil liberties should they be allowed? And that's the question we have to think about.
Dr. Knight, you want to address that question?
Yeah, we have to disaggregate the different types of crime. I mean, one of the most serious is the connection with narco-trafficking. And that has to be approached internationally. There is no Caribbean state or any state in the world that can do that. The models we have is the way that piracy was eliminated when it became an international issue, or slavery was abolished when it became an international issue. The same thing with narco-trafficking. The biggest weakness in the narco-trafficking or the counter-narco-trafficking organization is that so far nobody is willing to attack the market. The United States wants to eliminate producers and production and transportation and middlemen, but it doesn't want to do anything about one of the biggest markets for this. If you have a market, you will have a supplier. So international organizations, the United Nations, the Organization of American States, CARICOM, must at these regional institutions approach the problem and approach it cohesively. Second, then you have a second tier of communication. There is a major educational problem, not in terms of formal education, but in telling people that crime actually costs. States are paying more on crime than they're paying on health or on education. You have got to get your priorities in order. You first have to approach this problem of eliminating crime because it's very expensive. And incarceration is not a solution. It's even more expensive because you're putting in a high cost maintenance operation, which is non-productive. And you do need, in all these economies, something that's productive.
So maybe we could privatize the prisons and put these people to work because they're draining the economy. I mean, what about that solution? I'm sure we're going to hear, oh, it's a human rights agenda, it's organized slavery. Okay, maybe it will be so in an economy or a society where people are very different and they're quote-unquote ethnic minorities who will be more at risk, like in Brazil, for example. But in a Jamaican instance, I don't know, because let's face it, most of us have great-grandparents who came out of the farms. And at that era, everybody was more or less, let's call it, not everybody, but let's say all the people who are now poor were once poor. Most of us are great-grandmothers who were market women or vendors. Yet we had a different value system, as you said. So yes, we have to segregate the different levels, put things in at the base so that the young people coming up have a different value. Try and address those groups, those women groups, those church groups who are there working in the community, give them support they need to strengthen their own resolve. The women, for example, they say they want to no longer be gun toters or gun hiders or hiding their sons from the police when they know that the police, their sons are gunmen. Okay, they know this. So at some point, they have to be willing to take this, the responsibility and say, blood is on my shoulder. And say, no, no more. Because yes, I love my son, but he's a criminal. I'm going to give him up.
Professor Forbes, you raised at the beginning the risk that we take when we deal with crime in terms of projecting a kind of negative image of the region. But how do we balance image with security?
Well, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about is this sense that we must be responsible as a society. As all citizens, we need to be responsible at all levels. I see an integration of social systems, of educational systems, of community systems. And you know what Dr. Nelson is mentioning is really ringing something true for me, because I think many people have dropped the ball. Teachers have dropped the ball, politicians have dropped the ball, church leaders have done that, and the mothers, the parents, you know, and so somewhere in there I'm thinking part of how we can address it is an intersection of all those social systems to you know, really respond to the problem. But again, with a very strategic way, I think we can address some of those issues instead of panicking and losing our, you know.
Professor Prasad, you from Guyana, and of course, all of it comes together in Guyana, but that added dimension of the political violence. I mean, the garrison thing has quietened down a little bit in Jamaica. Some people say it's gone. I don't share that view. But tell us in Guyana if you can work out some kind of strategy to deal with that issue there, given the various layers.
There are various layers. At the insurgency level, there will have to be a political solution, some kind of a negotiated political solution, and it will have to be carefully done so that all voices and all constituencies are taken seriously. It is no secret that there is an armed criminal insurgency in the country. There have been 3 massacres this year, And that's a country of 720,000 people. 3 massacres in the first 7 months of the year is very, very serious. I have argued elsewhere, and I argue now, that it is clearly intended to destabilize the government. I think the evidence is clear with that. The problem with Guyana is that it has become so highly racialized that any attempt to work out any kind of political solution is seen as a sellout for everyone.
Crime and violence in the Caribbean, they go deep, very deep roots, historical roots. They also have roots in the contemporary situation. When we come back, I'm going to offer hindsight. Carb Nation Crosstalk. We'll be right back.
When America wants to know what's happening in the Caribbean diaspora, there is one clear choice.
Hello, welcome to Carib Nation.
Both people inside and outside are very excited about today's program.
Looking at you, I can tell that you have traveled the journey.
One television organization brings America close to the people, stories and events that affects Caribbean life. Get close, get answers, get Carib Nation.
Welcome back to Carib Nation Crosstalk. The Calypsonian, the mighty Chalk Dust, has a calypso, where bandits come from? He asks that question and he answers it by saying, the bandits come from we. The bandits are nurtured in our Caribbean. The conditions in our region are as such that poverty is rife. Dispossession is rife. People no longer see very much hope in their daily lives. And so therefore, it is time that we in the Caribbean call a spade and look at ourselves, look at 50 years of independence and ask, have we done enough? Are we doing enough to save the children? Until the next time, this is David Hines thanking you for tuning in to yet another edition of Carib Nation Crosstalk. And before we go, I want to thank my very wonderful panel, Professor Diane Forbes from Trinity College. Welcome, your first time. Professor Randolph Posad from American University. Dr. Claire Nelson from ICS, the Institute of Caribbean Study. And Dr. Franklin Knight, Professor of History at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you all very much for coming on to Carib Nation Crosstalk, and surely we'll have to do this again. As you know, the time run out very quickly. Until the next time, this is David Hines saying thank you.